Hello, everyone. Those here and those online, welcome to RIC. I think we have two wonderful speakers today and two great talks. So I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Amiran Baduashvili, who's an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Hospital Medicine. He had his undergraduate education at Stony Brook University and his graduate education there as well for medicine, and subsequent postgraduate training at Cornell and New York Presbyterian. Dr. Baduashvili is an expert in evidence-based medicine. He's one of our associate vice chairs for education, evidence, and scholarship. And he's also an expert in Bayesian clinical reasoning, which he's going to talk to us about. Miriam, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. I'm going to talk to you about a Bayesian reasoning online course that I developed and has been implemented so far with the internal medicine residency program. So objectives for today's talk, I'll tell you a little bit about the course itself. We'll mention a few words about the need, why the course was developed to begin with. We'll discuss faculty pilot that was initially rolled out, followed by the residency implementation and initial results from there, and some future directions that we have in mind. And obviously, we'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. No conflicts to disclose. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of Bayesian reasoning that we formulate with this probability of illness as we talk to the patients, assess them, examine them, look at some of the laboratory imaging data, and as we get more information, we update likelihood of information, likelihood of the diagnosis using that new information. One of the concepts within the Bayesian reasoning that is often not well taught in medical schools and residency programs revolves around this dichotomy fallacy. So our electronic health record presents many of these lab test results that have continuous outcomes. They have many possible results, such as BNP, as dichotomies, as normal and abnormal, marked by being the black as normal and red abnormal. However, clinically, we know from experience that not all normals and not all abnormals are created equal. For example, BNP is dichotomized at cut point of 100, but we know that 105 and 5,000 are different types of positives. And even though 95 and 105 fall on different sides of the cut point, we know that this difference of 10 may be just a result of the variation of the actual the lab technique. So incorporating this into the course, here's the roadmap of the course itself. So the course starts out by introducing basic test characteristics, sensitivity, specificity, likelihood ratios, then builds to the Bayesian reasoning of dichotomous world, how to go from pre to post-test using positive and negative test results. Then we introduce intermediate test results. Sometimes it's not, it's kind of in between. What does that mean? How does that change disease probability? So that learners get to practice that. And they learn to move away from sensitivity, specificity, because those concepts break down once there are more than two possible results. And that naturally leads to then the concept of multi-level likelihood ratios and interpretation of continuous tests. So they learn interpretation of Christopher operating characteristic curves and really understanding the shades of gray in the diagnostic medicine. So they can tell apart very abnormal to moderately abnormal to mildly abnormal and so on. And finally, we address decisions under uncertainty, action thresholds, when we should proceed with more workup versus more treatment when we are facing uncertainty in the diagnostic process. The need for this online course was kind of multi-fold. I initially created this at Weill Cornell, and when we rolled this out to residents, this was just a small group problem solving. They had a list of patient cases that they would go through, and they would learn these concepts as they progressed through different cases. And they started talking about it in the rounds, and then attendings approached and said, well, if we think about ROC curves, I'm not sure I feel comfortable with it. Can you do faculty development around that? So we created a faculty course. And the medical students complained that our residents are talking about these multi-level likelihood ratios, never heard of that in preclinical years. Can we have something there? So then medical school asked for something. So it became quite unwieldy because this material was best taught in small group problem-solving way. It was not in a best position for like large lectures. So that requires significant time commitment. There was a difficulty also with learner variability. Some faculty had some degree of expertise, but some had none. So there was a need to kind of speed up and slow down depending on the who was in the room. And even within a single room, that was often variable. Here, some of that was also related to pandemic and the need to create more online content for the learners. Number of learners I mentioned, and there was a variability in the learners as well. And again, a small group setting, that was important to sort of keep that sort of experience. So I was a very fortunate recipient of the PACE award by the Department of Medicine, and then funds from that award were used to create this online course. So here's just an overview of what this looks like when a learner logs into the course. They go over the case. Here is a patient with some uncertainty about COVID diagnosis. They commit to pretest probability based on the patient scenario. They submit that, and then they get test result. In this case, PCR comes back negative. It's a patient with high pretest probability. Well, now they have to struggle with what that means and what their next steps would be based on that result. So they make further commitments, kind of put a nickel down, and then they see this video that walks them through the entire case and hopefully creating visually appealing approach to understanding sensitivity, specificity, how likelihood ratios are constructed, and how the test results change disease probabilities, and how that should influence our decisions. And usually at the end, we bring in some guidelines that coincide, that support our final conclusions. And it goes to the next case, which builds on the previous case, introduces new concept, and so on. So there's a succession of 10 cases that builds from kind of positive, negative type of tests like PCR, and then to more complex and continuous tests. So here are some of the initial results. I left a link to the course if you're, I would like to just take a look to see what it looks like. But initially, this was rolled out with the Division of Hospital Medicine. We had some volunteers who took the course, and we used a model that was introduced by Chokshi and colleagues, showing how best to incorporate kind of user-centric digital designs in academic health, academic centers, primarily related to the introduction of tools in EHR, but we modified it to fit the goals in introducing digital education. So, for example, what we did was a few things where initially all participants who volunteered, well, actually, at the beginning, a couple of them, about 3 of them, were asked to wait before they first logged in. We connected them on the Zoom, and then we told them, open the email now, and we didn't say a thing, and then just followed them to see what they did. To ensure the email that we sent them, that introduced the course, link, how to log in, made sense. That it didn't click, didn't go to, unintentionally go to places they weren't supposed to. Maybe that was related to the poor design of our email. So basically, we watched them interact with the login process and the course itself. And we asked them to kind of think aloud as they were doing that to see if it was user-friendly and what adjustments we need to make it more friendly. We conduct qualitative interviews, ask them questions about their experience, open-ended questions, so to kind of elicit feedback that we hadn't thought about, and we conduct pre and post tests, and also conducted a near live test where we, after they finished the course, we showed them a case without any multiple choice, without any sort of pointers, and we said, what would you do? And we had hidden things like we could help them out with a pretest, or we had ROC curve hidden there if they asked for it. But they didn't have to. They could just say, I'm going to call consultant and ask what this test means. But our hope was that they would use this knowledge to interpret the tests that they may not feel comfortable normally with this approach. So here are the results of the initial faculty pilot. So on the x-axis, you see individual questions, and on the y-axis, you see pre and post-test results, percentages in terms of the correct responses. In orange, you have pre-test, and the post-test you have in blue. Here are the results from our faculty. You start here with sensitivity, specificity, likelihood ratios, and general Bayes theorem, interval likelihood ratios, ROC curves, and so on. So kind of moderate performance in just sensitivity, specificity, but then you see kind of down here, lots of room for improvement, which it seemed like the course accomplished, at least in the near term. Here are some of the kind of evaluations of the course. Most of our faculty said that their prior knowledge in Bayesian reasoning was weak, or somewhat weak. No one said it was very strong. And then most of them felt that they gained a lot of knowledge and they felt satisfied by this course. Some of the lessons from the qualitative assessment was that they felt that the course was pertinent because it's built, entire thing is built around patient cases. So we try to kind of introduce kind of theory and math very carefully and build it around things that clinicians care about, interpretation of diagnostic tests and making subsequent medical decisions. Then they felt that they like to operate at the boundary of their comfort zone, that we kind of push the boundary a little bit further through this course, and then challenge was progressive. So they didn't feel like they were lost because it built up the complexity slowly. They liked the flipped classroom approach, reading the case, putting their nickel down, and then kind of watching the video and learning about the concepts afterwards. Here, some learners felt that it was too fast, some said it was slow, some said it was by speed. Many of them commented on that it was good to be able to speed up the videos or slow down. So here, my main takeaway is that for something like this, the online format actually probably fits everyone's tastes because they can modify their experience based on their needs. So some had to go back and redo the cases to understand it better. Some could speed through, understood it quickly, or if they already had prior knowledge. It was designed to minimize cognitive load. So in the entire course, we have more than 3.5 hours of videos throughout the course, and sensitivity was always the same color. Patients with disease were always the same color, red. Without disease, green. So those little kind of color coding and that kind of stuff, the visual aids seem to work well, help the learners through some of the more difficult math that they had to work through. And I really like some of the comments around the clinical reasoning impact, that they felt that it led them to kind of stop and slow down, activate system 2, more deliberative type of thinking. And a few of them commented that it may even reduce noise in decision-making and bias, as you sort of stop and say, well, it's positive, but what does that mean? How positive it is? Do I need to kind of think this in the context of the patient and assess everything else that I know about the patient before moving forward with a decision? So after the faculty pilot, some tweaks based on the feedback, we rolled this out to residency program last year. All residents were eligible to take it, and most did. We have about 150, 160 residents in internal medicine, and 138 completed it. So here you see the pre-test performance. It's kind of similar to what we saw with faculty. Again, that these are concepts that are just not well taught in general. So there's room to improve kind of all across the board in terms of the learner type. And then here I was really happy to see that that residents were able to improve their knowledge and answer questions about ROC curves, interval likelihood ratios correctly, oftentimes more than 50% of the time. Here, some stats: median resident pretests, 27% of the questions were answered correctly. Post, 82% of the questions were answered correctly. Similar results here in terms of their impressions about the course. Most of them said that they had received no instruction on Bayesian reasoning leading up to that level of their year, so internal, basically leading up to the residency. And very few said they had more than 10 hours, less than 10%. And most of them said they were at least somewhat or very satisfied by the course. Here are some of the qualitative comments. This course was great. I feel it is very applicable to clinical medicine, and I feel like I have much better understanding of how test results should impact our clinical decision-making through an exceptional course. I have eye-opening discoveries throughout this, very informative. This person commented that would have been better earlier on, and I agree, because that's when we develop habits about how we interpret test results and where we kind of train our system too, so we can make our system run faster and make more intuitive decisions. So this feedback is well taken. It should be probably earlier on. Here are some more. Some even ask for kind of more cases to work through and to reapply this on the words, to have a workbook of sorts. So this year, I'm not showing it here, but many of the folks had said, we want more, and this is the kind of stuff we're going to forget. So they asked for a refresher course. So I created another smaller version of this course where they kind of went through all the concepts in 2 cases. So through that, I was able to do some retention testing. So before taking that course, they were asked to retake these tests. So here you see pre-post that I showed previously. So here is the retention. So there are a couple of lessons that drawing. This is lighter blue. Not everyone has taken it. Actually, it's still ongoing. We'll finish by the end of next month. But I see that overall expected degradation in their knowledge, right? The lighter blue is smaller than the dark blue, but this is 1 year retention. This is 1 year after taking this course. And overall, for most concepts, there is still a delta between pretest and retention tests. So they learned, there was some sustainable learning, but I think it's not enough. And I think we need to do more to help our learners retain this content. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, some ideas around that. Another interesting findings that is coming out from this course is that we're able to collect data on their kind of nickels that they're putting down, what they think is the pretest probability based on the case scenario, how they believe test result changes probability of diagnosis before they do math and actually do the Bayesian portion. So we can see what that looks like. One of the criticisms I often hear about Bayesian reasoning is that, well, the pretests are subjective and it's going to be all over the place. So what's the point? Well, there's no better way around it, right? Because we still have to talk to the patient, make these subjective assessments. But what's interesting is that when we ask our learners to put your nickel down, just based on the case scenario, what we see is the fairly narrow variation in illnesses they frequently encounter. So looking at a case, this is a CHF, congestive heart failure, case 1. Here is the median pretest probability and the interquartile range. More than 75% of the residents felt pretest probability was over 80%. So pretty well aligned. So my kind of what this shows me is that we may be more aligned than we kind of give ourselves credit for in terms of our subjective pretest probabilities. However, where we see more variability is illnesses that we encounter less frequently, like pneumocystis pneumonia in this situation. So Down the line, this could potentially help inform where the education may need to be targeted. What are some of the things that we have more poor understanding in terms of the patient assessment and the pretest probability calculation. Another thing that we did was we introduced them with the case that, for example, here they knew pretest probability was intermediate for PE, and then they got 2 test results. Actually, high pretest probability for PE. I apologize, based on the wall score, and patient had negative lower extremity ultrasound and intermediate Q scan. Here are the post-test probability guesses by the residents. Very amazing. They're all basically correct that these 2 tests slightly decrease probability of PE, but not enough to rule it out at all. So again, we see how our residents are thinking through these cases kind of in real time. However, here I have a patient with a high pretest probability and negative JVP and negative chest X-ray for heart failure, and now large variability. Some think probability is down to 20%, some believe it remains 80%. Based on personal experience, having run these, I find that learners earlier in their career tend to anchor to tests more. So interns are a bit more likely to say the probability is decreased a lot when they're presented with a test finding, whereas those with more experience will say, wow, I've seen plenty of patients with normal looking X-ray with pretty bad heart failure, so they don't change pretest a lot. They kind of go with clinical assessment more. But we are going to look at this stratified by the PGY level and see where these plans go. So lastly, a couple of things regarding current and future directions for this course. So one of the things that came up that is obvious from the retention test is that there's a need for spaced repetition. That one-time course is not going to teach them enough that to create sustained kind of knowledge. So we created a review course. Here, this is also a hot link, so you can click and I'll share these slides. You can look at what that looks like. And we've started to incorporate these concepts in residency new conferences. So I did a separate faculty development for chief residents, and we plan to continue to do that so they can bring these concepts more at ease during the new conferences. So sometimes they'll email me and say, hey, I have this case, I have this test result, triglycerides for ascites. Is this Chilis ascites or not? So let's find ROC curve. Let's see how that test changes disease probability, and we bring this to the new conference to kind of reintroduce these concepts to the residents. Then we've also tried to target different learner types so that on the wards, medical students, residents, and faculty both have some degree of familiarity around this concept. So there's conversations can happen more at ease on the wards in real time. So we have taken some faculty development efforts. This course is open to all our faculty here. And we created Bayesian reasoning course also for medical students, and I teach now to the first-year medical students some of these concepts, and also to advanced practice fellows. And our goal is to also make this course external facing and opening it up to external learners who are interested in. Lots of feedback that we would benefit from point-of-care tools that like app or PDF where they can quickly reference look at the test result and see that shades of gray, how different abnormalities change disease probabilities. And I'm excited about the last one here. This was actually a medical student. So we started teaching this Bayesian reasoning for the first time this last spring. And one medical student came up and said, well, how do we know that this actually changes decisions? So we are planning a randomized study with simulated cases where we provide no diagnostic characteristics to dichotomous to multi-level with explanation of what that means to see if that changes decisions. And hopefully that will lead to a type of an RCT in the EHR where some clinicians would be able to view those additional details about tests, and we can see whether that leads to decreasing inappropriate testing and so on. So that's all. I want to say big thanks to Lauren Macbeth, who's a project coordinator and a great collaborator, Dr. Marisha Burden, who's in the room here. This was her idea. She was like a visionary, and this, in fact, she suggested make this online course before COVID, and then COVID hit a couple of months later. Thank you, Dr. Burden, for your mentorship and guidance. And this was a clinical scholar from hospital medicine last year who contributed a lot. And this is my mentor from La Cornell, who I learned a lot about Bayesian reasoning on. And thank you for PACE Group, Dr. Connors, and Dr. Brandenburg for mentorship and guidance throughout this.
Sorry, the questions that people ask after taking the course, or pre-course, whatever, is it a multiple choice questions or?
Did they answer the pre and post?
Yeah.
So it's a great question. I did both, and one of the reasons I did that was that I believe that, and we'll see that, I believe that sometimes we can answer questions about sensitivity, specificity correctly when we see the answer, but we don't really have it internalized. So what we did was, first we asked them to answer in a free text. What defines sensitivity without any further guidance? And after they put their nickel down, they move to the next page, then they could get multiple choice. One of the things we want to look at is correlation. Multiple choice versus free text to see if they're well correlated or not, to see whether we may be losing some assessment just by going with multiple choice. Because some of this stuff, again, you can guess when you see the right answer, but may not really have the knowledge internalized so you can apply it more intuitively to the patient.
But does the answer, I'm sorry, absorbing that for another minute. Do the answers lead them to the next question, whether, let's say I answer in one way, will it change the clinical situation of a patient, or it doesn't? It just, there's no progression from that answer to course of a disease, is that right?
Oh, I see. So like if they say, well, that's my answer, this is the treatment I'll prescribe, then it changes what they do next. Oh, that would be amazing to have. We don't have that kind of branching logic, but that would be a fantastic way to design it.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
And that was fantastic. Appreciate it.